Is nuclear power the best energy? Well, today we're going to be taking a closer look. Hey everyone, I'm Alice and this is Nature News. And today we're doing an inside look into the power sources that run our lives. Electricity. For those of us in the developed nations, things as simple as flipping the switch for lights are things we take for granted. But for those in developing nations, electricity is often a luxury and an unreliable one at best. Now, electricity and how we get it is becoming a discussion in more and more circles as we try to shift away from coal and the burning of fossil fuels and electrify more of the world in a sustainable way. Every year, the globe's demand for electricity grows, with more and more devices, more demand for heating and cooling, and more demand now for vehicle charging. But the big question on a lot of people's minds is how we can provide electricity to the world and still be sustainable. Now, wind and solar can at best only power a fraction of the global demand for energy with today's battery technology. So what's the most sustainable source? Now, all energy has pros and cons, and the big one with nuclear has always been safety and the waste management of nuclear waste that's created in the cooling process, which we're going to get into. But first, let's talk a little bit about what nuclear power is and where they're using it. Nuclear power plants create energy from splitting atoms in a process called nuclear fission. This is when the heat from the nuclear reactions is mixed with water to create steam, which is then used to power turbines that generate electricity. Now, all nuclear power plants use nuclear fission, and most of these power plants as well use uranium atoms, usually from uranium-235. Now, uranium is used as a fuel because it breaks apart easily when it collides with a neutron, and when this happens, it actually releases energy in the form of heat and radiation. When that happens, the neutrons from the uranium itself, they start colliding with other atoms, and this starts a nuclear chain reaction which continues infinitely. This chain reaction creates even more power, but in a power plant, they actually control the reaction to a set amount of heat to harness the energy. Now, currently, nuclear energy supplies 12% of the world's electricity, but 20% here in the United States. There are 440 reactors in operation in 30 countries around the world, and one of the largest plants is actually located in France, where they generate almost 70% of the country's electricity. As of October of 2020 in the US, there were actually 56 commercially operated nuclear power plants and 94 reactors across 28 states. And they're still building 2 new reactors right here in Georgia. So that's how nuclear power works. It splits atoms, it creates energy in the form of heat and radiation. And there are a lot of pros and cons to nuclear power. So let's go over some of the benefits. Now, nuclear plants don't produce greenhouse gases, unlike coal and natural gas, which is great. They actually produce steam as the emission, which reduces the amount of greenhouse gas emissions by around 470 million metric tons, which is the equivalent of taking 100 million cars off the road. That's a lot. Now, the energy output of a nuclear plant is really high compared to other energy sources, so you get a lot out of a little bit. Just a small amount of uranium, actually just over the size of an eraser, can actually power the same amount of energy as a ton of coal, 3 barrels of oil, or 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas. Uranium is also relatively cheap, so once the plant has been built, the cost of creating power is actually relatively low. It's also reliable and constant, unlike other renewable sources like wind and sun, which have to dictate by nature. Now, it's believed that nuclear supplies will last a lot longer than our current fossil fuel supplies, but it's still not going to be very long. Nuclear power plants also create more jobs than other forms of energy sources. For instance, one power plant can create 400 to 700 permanent jobs, compared to just 90 for a coal plant or 50 for a natural gas plant. Here are some of the cons and some of the things that you have to think about when you're thinking about whether or not this is a sustainable source. So uranium is actually considered a non-renewable energy source. Even though it's a common metal found in rocks worldwide, nuclear power plants use uranium-235. Now, this is because this particular type of uranium splits apart easily. And although uranium is about 100 times more common than silver, this type of uranium is actually relatively rare. making up just 0.7% of the uranium found on Earth, which, guys, would only sustain the energy demands of the current plants for about 230 years, and that is not sustainable. This means that it's not a renewable energy source, and therefore nuclear power is a finite resource. Unless we figure out nuclear fusion, this is where we're at right now. Now, this is a clean energy source, but the process of mining and the transporting of uranium to power the plants produces pollution, which often contaminates water sources and degrades the land. On top of that, creating these plants also is not emission-free. Now, most of the uranium mined in the world comes from Kazakhstan, Canada, Australia, Namibia, Niger, and Russia. And most of the uranium ore in the US comes from the western United States. Also, once this uranium is extracted, it still has to be processed before it can be used. And some of the other concerns with uranium are accidents at nuclear plants, which can be catastrophic, as we have seen. Now, these release dangerous amounts of radiation into the environment, as was the case in Chernobyl and Fukushima. And it's a growing concern in many locations around the world as the climate changes. Now, disposing of nuclear waste is also not easy. The decay rate of uranium-235 is 700 million years, and it takes many years for this radiation level in nuclear waste to reduce enough to be considered safe. Now, while uranium may be cheap, the initial cost of setting up the plant is high, and the material used in construction also contribute to climate change. There's also the water demand. Now, reactors need a huge amount of water to cool the reactors, so they're always built on or near a coast, an estuary, or a river, making them vulnerable to floods, droughts, and sea level rise, and they contribute to local water demand. And after the fuel is spent, it must also be stored, and this is commonly done in underground storage tanks, which in the past have leaked and contaminated drinking water, river systems, and ecosystems. This happened most notably in the Savannah River here in Georgia, where the water is still not clean and the fish there are still filled with radiation, making it unsafe for people to eat fish out of this ecosystem to this day. Now, in my mind, the findings are pretty clear. While nuclear may look sustainable on the surface, building and maintaining the plants is not only costly, but comes with many dangers and risk factors that outweigh the finite energy we can harness from it. I hope you guys learned something new in this video. Please drop a comment if you have any questions or you want to learn anything else about nuclear power. I'll be in the next couple of videos talking a bit more about solar, wind, battery storage, and some of the other energy options out there for all of us that want to learn more about where our wonderful electricity comes from. And if you guys aren't subscribed yet, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and join our Facebook community at the link down below as well, so you can chat with me about nature news, climate solutions, and wildlife as well. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.